Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Giobbi, and I combine music study and psychology. And I thought it would be helpful to make a little instructional video, informational video um, for musicians, trombonists primarily, on understanding um, how learning takes place in on the different levels, from the personal level, behavioral level, to the neurological level. And I recommend anyone who's interested in this kind of stuff. William James is a great resource. Now, he wrote his textbook on psychology in 1890, but I still find William James to be the most informative uh, regarding music practice. So there's two big thick volumes, The Principles of Psychology, published in 1890 by William James, and in it you'll see chapters on habit, which is what we do when we practice. We form habits, on making and breaking habits, and also on how neurologically what happens when we learn. This is stuff that James was way ahead of his time on. But if we talk about neuroplasticity and Heb Learning Theory, this is another contemporary neuroscience take on what's happening. So I'm just going to explain it to you very simply. But if you want to learn more, there's so many books out there. But I would start with, everybody should have James on their desk. The Principles of Psychology. They'll teach you everything you want to know. And like I said, 1890, and it holds up to 21st century. This is a 19th century text that holds up to. I have yet to find something in that text that isn't supported by 21st century contemporary psychology. Fascinating. American psychologist William James. Okay, so Donald Heb described what I'm about to describe to you, Heb Learning Theory. So some of you have read about neuroplasticity and things of this. I'm going to explain firstly, when you rehearse something on an individual level, repetition. Practice, they say, makes perfect, and a teacher of mine used to say practice makes permanent. So if you practice something habitually, that is going to become ingrained in you. So make sure when you're practicing, you practice correctly. Otherwise, you're going to be rehearsing bad habits. And I had not a lot, but I had some bad habits in my playing with my embouchure and my slide technique and my breathing that had to be corrected when I went from my first trombone teacher to my second trombone teacher. And my second trombone teacher pointed, hey, you have to change this, you have to change that. And it made a world of difference in my playing. So I had practiced in things that were incorrect. And it's kind of hard because the things that were incorrect for me may not be incorrect for you. So well, the the habits, you have to be very careful with these habits, and that's why it's good to have a teacher to work with you one on one. So repetition is everything in music practice. Repetition is everything. You have to enjoy spending time alone, and you have to enjoy repeating things. And there's lots of stories of family members and neighbors who get tired of hearing uh, the same passage or the same beat, collection of the same motif, the same phrase, four measures, whatever, over and over again. We spend hours on a tiny little piece of a piece of music. So when you repetition, so take something you want to work on and repeat it over and over and over and over again. And you have to be patient with yourself because results typically don't happen gradually. They usually happen suddenly. We call these learning plateaus. So you'll be going along at a certain level, sometimes for weeks or months, and then all of a sudden you'll hit this plateau and you'll be at a whole different level. It's like all the practice, you would expect it to, your ability starts here and it gradually increases to get better, but wow, in my experience, it's like you practice, you see no results, practice, no results. And then all of a sudden, like month, 2 months later, 3 months later, you're like, oh, wow, there it is. And this makes sense, actually. There's a book by V.S. Ramachandran called Phantoms in the Brain. And he tells the story about how stroke victims, individuals who are paralyzed, lost mobility on one side of their body, how if for 6 months, half a year, if they are restricted from using the functioning side, so a strap is put that actually holds their arm, that they can't use it for an hour a day, and they're told to think about using the right arm. Like, I want to pick up my glass case, and I think about doing it, and I intend it, and the intention, but the arm doesn't move. Well, patients become very frustrated. They say, why are you making me do this? And then suddenly, a half a year later, 7 months later, all of a sudden, their arm starts working. And it's the intention is causing the neural pathways to reconnect, to growth, neural growth. So the brain is the nervous system. You have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And you have the peripheral nervous system, which is all of the afferent and efferent nerves. So in other words, all the nerves that are going out to the muscles and all the nerves that are coming in from the sensory organs up through the spinal cord up into the brain. And the majority of this whole nervous system is made up of something called glial cells. Glial cells, glial is Latin for glue, and glial is like, you can think of it like jello. And this gelatin is like the stuff that is pliable and movable, and it holds the nerve cells. There are different types of nerve cells. Again, there's sensory nerves, there are motor nerves, there are interneurons. These are neurons that connect other neurons together, and they form neural chains. You can sometimes neuroscientists talk about this as wiring, and it is true that it's an electrochemical system, just like a battery is chemicals, that electrochemical system. That the body is an electrochemical system, a nervous system, but it's much more than that. So this is just a way of understanding it. And these wires, these neurons, form these chains, but they're alive. They grow. They reproduce in a sense. We can produce new growth, new neural growth. So as James pointed out, the more that you do something, for the first time, there's very little connection between two neurons that need to speak to one another. And slowly but surely, the more you rehearse something, the neurons grow closer and closer together, and they continue to grow after you stop practicing for the day. And that's the experience of waking up in the morning, and after a whole day of practicing, you wake up in the morning and suddenly you can start doing things on piano or with the slide. In piano, it's finger control. On trombone, as you know, it's a very odd coordination between lips and hand, lips and arm position, and tongue. Fingers, it's finger dexterity, and wrist and arm. So the more, when you stop practicing, the brain keeps working on it. And a lot of this, it turns out, a lot of this work takes place during sleep. So sleep isn't just about feeling refreshed. It's like, actually, when we sleep, it seems that the research suggests that when we're sleeping, learning is taking place. But it's learning of something that we've put effortful work into beforehand. So we have these neurons, and the term that's often used is neurons that fire together, wire together. So what starts out gradually is two neurons working together, coming closer together, making connection, and they come close to each other so that this chemical, these neurotransmitter, chemical substance can be sprayed out of one and sucked up in another. And the more you practice, the neurons form thicker bundles, more and more nerves. Like the one set, two neurons become many neurons, and it creates a thick bundle of neurons. And that is when habit becomes ingrained, and when you can start doing something without thinking about it. Playing piano and have a conversation. You've been practicing something for many months, and that becomes possible. When you're just learning it, any slight conversation becomes a distraction. So, and it's also incidentally why habits are so hard to break. If you're used to doing something and you do it over and over and over again, and these thick nerve bundles become the default way of doing it, you then have to start from scratch and not only stop doing it this way, but effortfully, just like the person with paralysis, effortfully, intentionally start doing something with just one neuron. So you have a very weak one neuron connection competing against a very thickly bundled over years. Think about habits of anything in life this way. Again, this is William James. So this is how learning takes place on the personal, habitual, experiential level, all the way down to the neurological level. And what I'm presenting to you is a framework, a way of understanding things. Science is theory, and theory is working model. William James, this is turning out to be a lecture on James for musicians. James actually wrote another book called Talks for Teachers. It's a thin little book for teachers. That's a great book. I should that would be a good one to start out with. It's not as heavy as literally as heavy as the 2-volume Principles of Psychology. So to take away from this is slow cook everything. So a slow cooker, you put your food in the slow cooker and it's low heat, long period of time, and it gets real tender and supple. In learning, slow cook what you're learning. Slow, low heat, slow practice over a long period of time, and you're going to allow those things. And suddenly you hit the plateau. And that plateau might take months. I've already had instances where it's taken over a year to get something, consistent work. And it happens. You just have to remain consistent and patient, and that's part of being a musician, being patient and spending a lot of time in repetition. So some books to think about. V.S. Ramachandran's Phantoms in the Brain is a great book. You can look up Heb Learning Theory. You can look up William James, Talks to Teachers, Pragmatism, or the Principles of Psychology, and put this stuff to use. I hope this is helpful for those of you who want to have an understanding of psychology and what it has to offer in playing. There's it's been very helpful in my life pursuing cross-training, doing professional work in both music and psychology and philosophy, incidentally. When you approach something with a loose understanding, I see many videos and people talking about things, and there are some really wonderfully made and great ideas, but there's also a danger there. The danger is always not knowing what you don't know, and it's always helpful to do a lot of research. So take what I've had to offer you today and compare it to other sources of information. But always be aware of the source and say, is this useful? Is this helpful? Is it reliable? You know, the hallmark of good thinking, I believe, is that it's reliable and it's valid. In other words, it not only works, but it works consistently. And when it stops working, we have the responsibility to do more research, do more thinking. And that, in my tradition of psychology, we talk less about research and more about search. So enjoy doing good work, and I hope that this is useful to someone out there in musician life.